Best-selling author and American psychologist Mary Pfeiffer said this: "We live in a world filled with language. Language imparts identity, meaning, and perspective to our human community. Writers are either polluters or part of the cleanup team. Just as the language of power and greed has the potential to destroy us, the language of reason and empathy has the power to save us. Writers can inspire a kinder, fairer, more beautiful world, or invite selfishness, stereotyping, and violence. Writers can unite people or divide them." In this book show podcast, host, confidence coach Susan Axelrod asks women authors a simple question: which kind of writer are you? She invites each guest to step into the confidence zone to proclaim how her book can inspire. If you are seeking inspiration to create your legacy, take out your pen and pad. Your book, My Time, starts now. Welcome, friends, to this episode of Your Book, My Time. You may think that you need to physically get onto a roller coaster to feel that thrill, to feel adrenaline coursing through your veins and the chills crawling up your body from the ups and downs of your real life experience. But I want to let you know that you can get this adrenaline, you can get this experience from sitting and reading a book. Today's book is one of those that will give you a roller coaster ride if you allow yourself to get lost in it. My author today is Cynthia Ehrenkrantz. She is the author of Seeking Shelter, Memoir of a Jewish Girlhood in Wartime Britain. Cynthia Ehrenkrantz was 6 in 1939 when Britain entered World War II. She was 12 in 1945 when the war ended. Seeking Shelter is her vivid child's eye account of life in wartime England as she lived it. An adored only child in a large Jewish clan whose comfortable existence becomes one of food shortages, gas masks, and air raid sirens, and worst of all, being sent away for months and years at a stretch to escape German bombs. Contending with bullies, rushing from a warm bed to a backyard shelter when sirens wail. Life is hard, but also good. Shining in a school play, collecting foil for the war effort, celebrating Passover. These are the mixed realities of wartime that mark young Cynthia forever in ways only adult Cynthia can understand. Friends, I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to today's author, Cynthia Ehrenkrantz. Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I want to tell our friends, our listeners, our viewers that I started this book show to give women a place to share the seminal messaging, the intuitive wisdom that came up from life experience. But today, I'm doing something so much more, which is giving voice to the girl in you. And I simply could not be more delighted to be able to do that. Cynthia, I just learned, and I would like to ask you to share because you said that you would. How old are you today, Cynthia?
Well, I'm 89 3/4.
There's the girl voice coming out of you, just like the 5-year-old says, I'm 5 3/4. I love it.
Yes.
So fantastic. The reason I ask that is that I work with women in the second half of life. I work with women who are in their even late 40s, 50s, 60s, who feel like they don't have anything left to do. And here you are writing and publishing this book just out last month. And I want to congratulate you. And I want to just shower that little girl in you with love. I wish that she then could have known you now. I have a thesis, Dear Younger Self. My second book is called Dear Younger Self. And my upcoming book is called Dear Future Self, Cynthia. I can't think of anything more apt here. Can you?
No, that sounds very appropriate.
Yeah. So I want to ask you to share with us, what is the story behind the story of your book, Cynthia?
Well, I never really intended to write a book. Um, I um, when in the 90s, when my own children were busy getting married and having babies, etc., I knew that they would have no interest in any of my past. But I remembered that I regretted very much not learning more about my grandmother's childhood. And she was born in Poland. And I never really asked her. My mother was a storyteller, so she told me a lot of stories about her childhood. And I look back on them and I thought, I'm going to write these down for my kids. And
Mm.
because even if they're not interested now, I know that when they're older, they will have those same regrets. And so that's how I started. And I started going to writing classes at Sarah Lawrence.
Oh,
I started writing these pieces. And my teacher, Charles Salzberg, said to me, Cynthia, you have a book here. And I said, no, I don't. I just have some pieces. He said, you have a book here. Well, the last person I heard him say that to was a woman called Lauren Weisberger, who was in my class. And she wrote The Devil Wore Prada. And I thought, that's a good omen. So maybe I should go for it. So that's how the book started.
oh my gosh. There's so much richness in there. But most of all, I simply have to call out something that actually just came up in a coaching session this morning. So it's coming up a second time right now. And that is when one person believes in you, when one person shows you that you have something, if you can open up and believe them, you can move forward with it. And that happened with you, with your writing teacher. Another thing I would like to shout out here is you had an idea and you activated on that idea, Cynthia. How many people have an idea and never do anything with it?
Well, I did I didn't think that it would be of interest to anybody beyond my family. But as I was writing, more and more things came up because it was about my childhood, and my childhood was mostly during World War II.
Mm.
And people kept on saying to me, I never knew that. Uh, I didn't know that about England. Who
Mm.
knew that clothes were still rationed well after the war?
Mm.
Who knew about any of these things that I talk about at length in different anecdotes and stories? Who knew that?
Mm.
So, and and particularly several people, and they've been men, have said to me, I never understood why Winston Churchill was thrown out after the war. But if you read my book, you'll understand why he was thrown out.
Interesting. So I want to let you know we have some viewers joining us. If we have viewers with us today, I want to invite you to write comments. We'll be reading your comments and introduce yourselves to us. So there's a couple of things that resonate deeply with me as I have a couple of published books myself. And I wrote my books. They are anthologies of articles that I wrote for a magazine. It wasn't so much about, I thought people would be interested, as I wanted to share the wisdom gleaned and gained from what I learned. And I feel like this book, which narrates, first of all, your parents, which was very interesting. The whole beginning of the book, it narrates your parents' upbringing, and then quickly moves into your life and your experience as a Jew growing up during that time, and the real life experience of the kinder transport. I mean, all of these things, I cannot say enough. Actually, now I'm answering. This is what always happens, Cynthia, because the second question that I ask is, why is your book worth my time? And my answer is so much richness, such a deep resonance for anyone who doesn't understand, anyone who's curious to learn about what life was like, living during that that time. And I just want to ask you now, since you brought it up, how have your own children resonated with the book?
Oh, my kids have been thrilled. Of course, they've read parts of it throughout, but my daughter said to me she never had read things in chronological order, and there were a whole lot of new things when she read the book that she had not read at all. And I have two sons, and they've both been really interested. My middle son has just written a book or published a book himself. So we've been two writers alongside. So that's been very interesting.
Oh my gosh, this is almost too much for me. I mean, that experience alone, we could do a whole podcast conversation about you, the mom, him, the son, and becoming writing partners of a published book along the way.
Yeah.
But I also want to say, why is your book worth my time? Listening to this conversation, participating in it with you and our viewers watching this video, our listeners listening to the audio podcast. There's so many important messages in here. You said, I thought that my kids would regret it if they didn't know. I went to write it out, to write about it. You therefore took action. There's a lot in there. And then your daughter, all your kids actually reading and supporting your writing along the way. Another piece that's very, very important for us to understand is you joined a writing group. That's
vital, I think. And I joined a class to begin with, and then a group of us have been meeting afterwards. Probably for more than 10 years. We meet every 2 weeks, and I can't express strongly enough how important it is to have a supportive group of writers who understand the writing process themselves. And we're very critical, but we're very critical in a supportive manner. We don't say to people that's a bunch of rubbish. I mean, that's not constructive. But we, as a group, we are a very constructive group. And we've developed a chemistry. Sometimes, a person joins and we give them like 2 or 3 weeks trial and to see if we're mutually good. And if we're not, then we mutually agree that person shouldn't belong. But for the most part, our core had been together about more than, I think, 10 years. Yeah.
That's so good for me to hear. I actually run an accountability group, Cynthia, and we meet every single week. These are women in business for themselves.
Right.
And I've learned the power, and you just shouted it out, even though I didn't know about it. Accountability is absolutely key and vital along the way in that support, because sometimes, especially as a writer, because I also do what I call book Sherpa coaching. So I don't coach on book writing, but I help people bring the writings together to create a book anthology of writings.
Right.
And it's exactly that you're talking about. Now, I did have a question as I was reading. Did you journal growing up?
No, I did not.
Okay. Interesting.
I find journaling is very hard. But I recently started trying to journal again. It's never too late. But what I used to do was, if I would start off very ambitious, and then I would miss a day or 2 days, and I would say, "Oh, all right, then I can't do it." Now I've said to myself, no. Whenever I think of it, I could have missed a week, but if I've had a day that I want to record, and if I remember to do that before I go to sleep, it's next to my bed is this diary. And so I'm trying it again. It's never too late.
I am like literally in ecstasy right now, Cynthia, in this conversation, to have an 89-year-old, almost 90 in another quarter of a year, say to me, it's never too late. This is my thesis and my practice and my experience with my physical fit life. So when I don't go to the gym and time passes and then you say, oh, why bother? I don't have that experience. I am in the experience of what you just said about journaling. Now is the time. Now is the time. And everything you record at this time, perhaps in the evening, when it strikes you, when it occurs to you, these writings are going to be your next book. And it's so precious. I love knowing about them. Thank you so much for sharing this practice with us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You were going to ask me something.
I wanted to really move into the detail of this book as and that's why I asked you about the journaling, because the level of detail, and you have some disclaimers, the disclaimer in the front of the book, which says to the best of my memory, but it seems to me almost as if through your writing process, through your self-commitment and the intention with which you wanted to share with your family, you really dropped in to the girl child you were. And that's why I said in my opening, now I feel like I'm actually giving voice to that girl as well. Your writing style really brings her to life. You can, when you're reading this book, you can really feel like you're with that girl. And then also her experiences, including recipes of the food she refers to. Tell me about the recipes you've included and why.
Well, you can tell my professional life was in the specialty food business. So you can tell I'm a foodie. And so, but those seeds were planted when I was very young. So that food obviously was very central. It was so central too with rationing and for my mother and my grandmother having to work out how to budget, to if you were only allowed 2 eggs a week per person, or what amounted to half a pound of meat per person, and those kinds of things, they remain very vivid to me. But I was fortunate that I had an editor who did an enormous amount of fact checking. And she came up with things to me like, Cynthia, you can't say that this happened in July because the Act of Parliament didn't pass until September. You have to move that incident to a more realistic time, because obviously I didn't remember the dates precisely.
Right.
But I'm very grateful to her for making it, as factually correct as it could be. And I think that there are loads of books about World War II. There are loads of memoirs, loads of Holocaust memoirs. Britain was not really Holocaust. Britain was outside of the horrors of what was going on in Europe. But I don't know of any other books, and I'm sure they're out there, but I don't know of any that are written really from a child's point of view. What was it like for a little girl whose parents' first priority was her safety? What was it like to be separated when you're 6, to be sent away to your grandparents who you don't know very well, and your grandmother happens to be dying in great pain from cancer? I mean, that experience, so I was only 6 years old, is as vivid for me today as it was when it happened. And I remember thinking, as I heard my grandmother crying out, "Mama, Mama," I thought, how can she have a mother? She's much too old to have a mommy.
Right.
But she was 56.
Oh my gosh. She was 56. Wow.
Years old and dying of cancer. But that was a safe area where my grandparents lived in Wales. It was far from the bombing. So the natural thing for my parents was just send me away. And I was sent away subsequently on other occasions.
So a couple of things I want to bring up. Okay. First of all, eggs and mushroom sauce. I love that one. Okay. So thank you for showing us how you've knitted together your life's path, your life and livelihood with this book. But hold on one second. Reading the book and talking about your grandmother and now hearing she was 56, that just took me a moment, because in my mind, I thought she was obviously way much older, but she wasn't. And also you reminded me of a part in the book. You talked about the kinder transport, and you talked about the women coming together and darning the socks for the boys who came over on the kinder transport. But here's the thing that I want to say. In that part of the book, those women there talked about how sad it was that the parents were in work camps. What you just told us here now about Britain not being in the Holocaust, you said, and that it was, kind of removed over there. That's what it reminded me of in the actual book, in that scene where you talked about, well, their parents are in work camps, of course, not knowing of the horrors and atrocities.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Wow. I'm breathing and I'm thinking, I'm honestly, really, truly breathing all of this in. There is such richness here. Before I go on, I want to say, I just put in the comments your name and the title of your book. And then in capital letters, I wrote, buy this book. The truth is, I'm sure nobody gets famous or certainly nobody gets rich by selling books on Amazon. No. So at this time, I would love for you to get as rich as you possibly can and spend all that money and all the self-love that you can, because you deserve it. But the truth is, I want people to read this book. I want young people to read this book. I want mature adults like me to read it, so you can do what I'm going to do, which is share it with my 18-year-old nephew who's into World War II. Because your voice in the book is so real. And that's why I asked you about the journaling, because it's so real how you did that.
Well, I think, I have very good memory for the things that happened when I was a child. But don't ask me what I had for breakfast this morning, because that's a different question.
Yeah, of course.
So,
of course.
But I think that particularly because so much of it is one would class maybe as traumatic, as being in bomb attacks and being in a shelter, etc. That people don't know about this. They don't know about what it's like for a child, and particularly in view of what's happening in Ukraine, where the refugees are being displaced and the children are being taken out and going to a school where they don't even speak the language. I mean, I went to, I think, 4 different schools during the war.
I know.
And that's very disruptive to a child. And so that those things, because they're on the edge of traumatic, that they make a huge impression. And so they have stayed with me.
Yeah. So a couple of things here. Oh gosh, this is so good. You say on the edge of traumatic, and I say full on capital T trauma. Yeah. It depends on your viewpoint. And, often people who experience traumatic events or are in trauma, whichever way you want to characterize it, often instead they forget, Cynthia.
Yes, that's
their
true.
Soul, their psyche suppresses. And that's another reason. And that could stay with them until decades later. They might get something, might trigger them. They might feel something back. But the fact that you have these memories and you didn't even go back through your 30 journals of a lifetime.
No.
You were not pulling forth. So this is really nearly magical in what you've created. I want to give a shout out to your editor for what you said about the fact checking, July to September. Come on, but still, You had this fact checking. It's a very, very, very big story here, Cynthia. This is a very big story for our day today because not just Ukraine, Syrian refugees,
Exactly.
African refugees, so many people who have experienced Ethiopian refugees, Russian refugees, so many who have experienced these things.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's a universal experience, and it's one that the United States was very sheltered from, because I mean, obviously, there were members of the armed services. They were not the people who were sheltered, but people who were in the States
Yeah.
had a very sheltered experience compared with ours.
Yeah.
And so I felt that the more that Charles encouraged me, the more important I thought it was to write down what was it like to live through a war and try to lead a normal life. Because you have to remember, I come from the country of the stiff upper lip.
Yes. And also, I want to welcome Wesley Curry, stop by to say hello. Thanks for joining us today. The narrative in the book also, that's another thing that I feel is so special about this book, Cynthia, and that's why I really read that part from the back of the book, because I really, it was so well written. It really depicted the life of, and again, even I get chills even now thinking about you at that 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 3-year-old age with all the grandparents and the doting aunts and uncles who loved you so much, and the life that you lived at that time, and then going forward, and then the evolved struggle of your parents who owned the store, and your father even later still making, if I got this right, please let me know, if your father making the decision to become vegetarians.
Yes.
Because the ration cards, you got more cheese in ration cards than you got meat. And your father had a healthy orientation to nutrition, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah. He was a health nut before the word was invented. And so, yeah. So I tell people I was raised vegetarian. So it's no problem for me if you say, "Oh, I don't eat meat and I'm coming to dinner."
Right, exactly. It's so incredible. Let me just ask you, what do you want people to do as a result of reading this book, Cynthia?
Well, I thought about this a bit, and friends of mine have said, "I loved your book. It was so interesting. I didn't know any of this. My childhood was so ordinary." And I say to them, "No, it wasn't. Your childhood is unique. And just like my kids, your kids are going to want to know, even if they don't want to know now because they're busy changing diapers and sleepless nights. They'll want to know, and they'll be glad if you will write it down. And if writing is not your medium, maybe you want to paint, or maybe you want to make clay sculptures or something that will hand down this genealogy, this particular experience that's so valuable in every family." So, and of course, what the other thing I want to come out of it is I really want people to buy it.
Yeah, of course. We really do want people to buy this book, to read this book, and to share this book. I especially want people who resonate with the stories shared in this book that might activate their own memories to then do what it is that you are advocating here. Cynthia, you don't know this, but since last year, I have had an intention to start a writing group. Because I'm a writer, and I know that accountability is everything for a writing group. And I've put it off. And, once you start a group, you have to get people for it. But here it is. You and I did not plan this at all. Right. But here it is coming up to me. I also help people write what are called legacy letters. And that's another piece of what you're talking about, is that you actually, share your legacy in a way that your loved ones can experience it. And that is how we perpetuate, life, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
I love that as a call to action here, friends. Number one, go to Amazon right now and find this book. It's called Seeking Shelter, Memoir of a Jewish Girlhood in Wartime Britain. The author I am absolutely delighted to be speaking with today is Cynthia Ehrenkrantz. This book is rich. It's filled with important, absolutely vital history in real time, real time remembering that we can all learn and be impacted today. Cynthia, I want to thank you so much for joining me, taking your time and joining me here today. And I want to thank you so much for activating yourself and doing the work. I know I've written books. I work with authors. I work with writers to sit and write and write and write and write. I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And thank you for a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm already looking forward to the next book. I'm looking forward to another conversation. I admitted to Cynthia, I made it about 2/3 through the book. After I finish this book, Cynthia, I may be coming back to you for part 2 of this podcast.
Oh,
okay?
Very good.
All right. Wishing you all the best. Take good care.
Thank you.